I'm going to share my screen. I am going to share my screen. You're going to have to let me share my screen, Riley.
Oh, goodness. This is what happens when people leave me in charge of the technology.
Yes, normally I'm in charge of the technology.
I know.
So welcome everyone. We are going to get started. We are letting everyone come in. We are going to, I'm going to share my screen. We are going to talk about transformation, like Riley said, as soon as I figure out how to minimize everyone so I can hit the present button. There we go. You got me present? No.
Is it not letting you?
There we go.
All right. Whew.
So as some of you might know, maybe, we have a podcast, and we have been spending the last season of our podcast talking about faith and transformation. And we have decided that we want to keep talking about transformation. We still have a couple episodes left. And so you haven't missed out if you haven't been listening, but you can certainly go back and listen to more and catch up. But we've been enjoying it so much that we decided to use one of the workshops to talk about transformation, because we just realized there's a lot to say. And so we are going to spend the next about half an hour talking about transformation. And the way we do our podcast is we spend a lot of time researching before each episode. And so we have learned a lot ourselves. And we wanted to take that opportunity to share it with you all. And so we were sort of inspired by this quote by Dolly Parton. I don't know if you can read it. I like fonts, but that doesn't mean that we can always read the fonts that I choose.
Doesn't mean they're always clear, but we do love Dolly Parton always.
But it says, we cannot direct the wind, but we can adjust the sails. I apparently also threw in the towel on punctuation, so just pretend that I have that in there. And so we're going to talk a little bit about transformation, but using this quote sort of as a guide, because what we have realized, not to sort of give away the whole workshop right at the beginning, but what we've realized is that we can't avoid transformation in our life, right? So it's going to happen whether we want it to or not. But we can decide, or at least guide, the direction that it takes. Maybe we can't be completely in charge, or at least as in charge as we want it to be, but we can certainly adjust the sails. And so we just love this quote. And so here it is for all of us to take a look at. We are going to follow a little bit of agenda because we are lawyers at heart, and so we like to make sure we stay on task. But there are sort of three main areas that we're going to focus on, and then I promise this is the last slide until basically the very end. We just like to make sure we all know sort of what the game plan is, and where we're going. But we want to start talking about first, kind of having a discussion as to whether transformation is gradual or sudden. Kind of, you can see what we think right from the start, but we're going to talk about it a little more. We're going to have a conversation about the inner voice. If you watched one of our workshops before, or listened to any of the podcasts, you know that we love talking about our inner voice and your inner voice. And then back to this concept of change and transformation being inevitable. So making sure that we are the ones in charge, or at least directing and guiding our own transformation. So those are kind of the three big areas that we are going to be following. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing so we can actually see each other's faces, or at least I can see your face when we're talking. I see a hand raised.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. So
Hi. Marcel here. So typical lawyer question. Sorry, I don't know if you can see me. I'm in not the greatest location in my house, but typical lawyer question. When I hear the word transformation, I think of it as something that is distinct from change. And I'm wondering if you're looking at change and transformation as being equivalent, because even in the slide, there's a little bit of equivalence there, and just what your thoughts are about the differences between change and transformation.
Yeah, I think obviously they're related. I mean, and connected. I think change is sort of a broader, more generalized global term for things that can be superficial, things that could be looked at in a larger sort of systemic manner. And what we're talking about is more of personal transformation. And it probably would help to put the word personal in front of it. We're trying to keep things a little tighter. And so what we're talking about when we mention the word transformation is really this concept of and we'll dig into this in a second in a little more depth, but the concept that in each of our lives as individuals, both our bodies as living organisms and our emotional world is in a constant state of flux and will be evolving perpetually. And so that is a transformation that never stops. And it is something, transformation and transformative, right? So it's more of an active process versus change, which I think is more of a global sort of a larger scale process that encompasses more than just our personal inner worlds. So
Fair enough.
that answers that question. But
That's
yeah, I appreciate that as lawyers. I appreciate the detailed questions.
I'm just glad you didn't say it depends.
Yeah, of course.
And I would also add that I often, as you can tell, I'm like, let's just jump right in. And usually on every episode, we try to start almost every episode with a definition. And so I'll jump right in and Riley will be like, okay, but let's go back and actually define what we're talking about with an actual definition. And I think though, where we sometimes use the word change, not interchangeably with transformation, but in this concept of the word sudden, where someone from the outside can look at you and be like, well, you've changed so much. And you're like, well, it was this very slow, gradual transformation. Right. And it wasn't really a change at all, or I don't feel like I changed at all. And that's when it gets, and like you said, it's not the same thing. So it can be really confusing.
And if I can add to that, sometimes I think of the concept of change as being something that can be imposed upon you, whereas transformation is something that hopefully is within your control.
Yeah, and so we do also, and I'll get into this a little bit in the next section, but we do also differentiate between traumatic transformation and intentional transformation. And so I would, I want to make a very clear distinction between those experiences, because when you go through a traumatic transformation, that is typically what we're talking about, what you're talking about, where it is a scenario where change is being, I hate to use the word inflicted upon you, but it is being enforced upon you in some way. Something has happened to cause change to happen in your life in a traumatic or sudden way. So I think of it as a difference between like a crisis versus a chronic experience, right? It's a sudden traumatic experience that's happened in your life, and that will eventually be transformative, but that transformation will take a long time, most likely, whether it's through a grieving process or a healing process or some other experience in your life.
Fair enough.
But so what Tova was talking about, I guess, in the beginning is this concept of whether transformation, and what we were just talking about is whether transformation is sudden or a long-term process. And what was interesting for the two of us when we started this particular season of the podcast and researching and talking to people, we knew at a base level that transformation is a long-term process. We knew it from our own life experiences, and we knew it just from research and general knowledge and skill set. But knowing it and then hearing it from so many different perspectives and places were two different things, I think, Tova, I think we could say, was a pretty surprising, I don't know, outcome from a lot of the interviews that we did throughout the podcast. And so one thing we wanted to start off this workshop talking about was that transformation itself, whether we realize it or not, is constantly happening. And so a lot of the times what we find is that, 10 years will go by and we'll look back and we'll go, oh, that was the moment that started the process. And I didn't even realize that was the moment when it was the moment, right? There's a lot of moments in that sentence, but I didn't realize it was happening, but it was happening. And then, I look back at it and I go, oh, that was the trigger for this whole 10-year change or transformation, I should say, of my life. And then, you realize that it was a 10-year process, not like, oh, I just woke up one day and I quit my job and changed my entire experience.
Well, and I think one thing that we realized, especially having conversations with people, and this is something that it can be very empowering, is that when we first started talking to people, and when people, I mean, for everyone, it was their only interview with us. If we had repeat experiences, but for them, it was their only conversation with us, is initially it was like, their transformation felt sudden, right? So you don't have to answer it, or you can put it in the comments, whether when you're looking back on your own transformations in your own life, if it felt sudden or gradual, or if you're listening to the recording, if you're thinking back on transformations in your life, have they felt sudden or gradual? But I think initially we do feel like they're sudden. Like, I look back on my 10 years and suddenly I'm here and I had this job and maybe I'm married and I have kids, and like, how did I get here? And then you look back and you can see all of these little tiny decisions that you made. And the nice thing about it is most transformations, except for those ones that you mentioned, Riley, that are traumatic or the result of a crisis. And even those are usually triggering a gradual transformation. But most transformations are actually really quite gradual. And maybe you can identify certain moments, but even the moments people identify they can be incredibly impactful, but they are a conversation at a bookstore, or they're little tiny moments in somebody's life. And what that tells me is we could all be having that moment right now, or like we could have that moment tomorrow. Like, we think that these moments are graduations and we think that these moments are job interviews. That's not what these moments are. These moments are these little tiny moments. And so they can happen any day. And so we can have these little tiny transformations happen gradually throughout the like, quote, normal days of our life, I guess, is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, I think we have been conditioned to believe that every major or every transformation we will experience, or every big celebration we will experience, is going to be a Hallmark event, right? It's going to be some sort of movie experience. And that is part of our cultural conditioning to not just believe that, but almost wish for that in a lot of ways, right? Because it's something that we all grow up on and we all experience as an entire group, as a collective, that's how things happen. It's all a big bang and it's exciting and it's a rush.
All the Hallmark moments.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so when it's not, sometimes we don't even recognize that it's happening. And it can be very hard to know that it's there and that it's real, or to trust that it is important. Even when everything in you is telling you that it's important, you could go, oh, but why would that be a big deal, right? Because nobody's giving me a card for this, or nobody's celebrating this for me, or, it seems like I'm making a big deal out of something that should be, that everybody else thinks is silly. So I think that we certainly for ourselves established throughout the process of going through the season of the podcast, but also through our life experience, that these smaller moments like Tova was talking about are potentially monumental in your life. And what that tells us is that we need to be able to be aware enough to recognize our own voice and our own sort of experiences when they're happening, so that when we do have these moments, we do trust them. We're not, pish-poshing them and pushing them aside and going, oh, I'm just being ridiculous, and who cares that when I looked at that sunset I cried, and that's a silly thing to do, right? Like, so that we can really go with our gut and understand that is that intuition, that inner knowing, that inner sense of self that does speak to us is true, and that it's ours. And so one of the things that we coach on and we talk about as really, really fundamental for our clients and for people that that we talk to, via the podcast and all the time is being able to hear that inner voice and that inner sense of self. And I think that is really key in order to being able to follow that Dolly Parton quote, to being able to adjust the sails and direct your own transformations, even though, I don't personally believe that we have control over everything in the world or what's going to happen to us. We certainly have the ability to direct our own reactions to what's happening in our world, and manage our emotions and work with those aspects of what's happening. And I think the starting point of that is being able to hear your inner voice.
Well, and Audrey commented that she said maybe the gradual transformations are the opportunities to seize the moment to act differently than we would have before. And that's why it feels gradual. And I don't know if I know you're off mute, Audrey, I don't know if you want to add to that, but I love that idea because it takes the pressure off the concept of like, I don't know, if you have to act differently when you're like, I'm going to change the entire direction of my course of my life by like applying for a different type of job than I ever applied for before, versus like, I'm just going to get up today and maybe try to really listen to who I really am and just walk that a little differently today. Like, I mean, that just feels harder and easier at the same time, but less scary maybe.
Yeah, I guess, sometimes like, for me and the transformations that I've, reflecting this moment of my own life, like sometimes, like, even though I know my vision, I have my vision, like I still fall into old habits. But then sometimes I'm like feeling like I put on that red lipstick, if you will, and like go conquer the day in that moment. And that might just last one moment, like for that one activity. But at least I've taken that opportunity to act differently, to become that higher self, if you will, or that next level of myself.
So I'm loving you said that, because we while we were waiting for people to join, I literally saw like a meme or something of somebody saying something about maybe we don't call it our higher self, and maybe we call it our favorite self.
Yeah.
And we were saying that takes like almost the pressure off, because it's like we can choose who our favorite self is that day. And maybe that day your favorite self was like red lipstick, Audrey. Like,
sometimes that works, like not for nothing. It can definitely be a red lipstick day, or sometimes just whatever it is, like eating well that day, like, or choosing to like indulge on something that I want. And that's like, all right, I've done something for myself and now I'm going to go out and do something. Or just, it could be like a good conversation with somebody, like, I have an empowering conversation and then I start acting more like that. Like I want to start doing that. That's why it's really important to surround yourself with people that, inspire you. I was also thinking of something else about transformation, and that is the fear. I mean, we know we're scared of change. Like it's a human, like
Human reaction.
Yeah.
human is part of the human condition, right? But when you know you have to change or transform, but you're really scared to take some of those steps, it's hard to act in that fear and the unknown.
For sure.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it's just so scary, like, because you're making new decisions and you don't know what the outcome's going to be. Even when we know we are strong, independent, smart, intelligent women, we know we're going to figure it out. That doesn't mean I still want to like go through what I know I like basically have to go through that struggle. Like, I don't always want to be like so strong all the time. Not in that aspect. I'll be strong in a million other things. It's not that one thing right now.
And one of the things that strikes me about transformation is that for most people, it is scary. And so what I like to say is that you're going to transform whether you participate in the process or not.
Mhm.
And so you have a choice. You can let it happen to you, and then who knows what the outcome will be.
Right.
But you will have to go through the suffering because that's a part of life. You'll also get to go through the joy, which is wonderful because that's also a part of life.
Mhm.
But you can choose to participate in the transformation and have more say in the direction in which it travels. And personally, as a very type A person, I like to participate in my transformations whenever possible. Now, that does not eliminate the suffering aspects of life, and nothing will. And no one wants to be strong all the time. And certainly as women, we know that that burden falls on us so much and so heavy. And there are things we can do to alleviate that for sure. Sometimes, we can't always alleviate all of it. And I certainly empathize with that. And I know Tova does. But when I think of transformation, I like to think of myself as a partner in my transformations,
Mhm.
because otherwise it's all happening to me. I would much rather it be happening for me. I would much
Right.
rather be participating in the process and be a partner in my life. And then we kind of, and we'll do another webinar on this. We'll do another workshop, but then we're sort of going towards the realm, and this is where I get a little wooey for people, but we're going towards the realm of, co-creating your universe and co-creating your life and manifesting the things you want in your life, which I think is less sort of quote wooey than people realize, because it really is more about becoming a partner in your life choices than it is about, calling on the spirits or whatever.
Mhm.
Toby,
Well, and I think, as we do talk a lot about listening, we're not talking about transforming necessarily. I mean, sometimes transforming is making a huge transformation. So, and sometimes that can be that big and scary. Those transformations can be big and scary. And sometimes we're talking about just actively making a choice each day to choose to be the favorite version of me each day, whatever that looks like. Riley made the analogy when we were talking earlier about like when you pick your favorite underwear for the day, and some
Right.
days that's like the comfy ones, and some days it's like a little lacy ones, and like whatever, but you choosing the version of yourself that you're putting out into the world, as opposed to having the world choose the version that you're putting out. And so that goes back to that concept of learning to listen to listening to your inner voice and listening to who you are. And I still have moments, and I say still because we talk about listening to our inner voice like all day long, all the time to each other. So I talk about it to my therapist, I talk about it to Riley on the podcast, not on the podcast, I mean, all the time. And so that's why I say still, but like, I still have moments where I'm like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound like my voice. Like, who's in my head? Like, why am I giving space to you? Why are you still there? You know, why are you taking up space in my head talking to me? And because you don't, you know, somebody else doesn't, whether it's a parent or a teacher or society or, you know, I don't know, movies, or, you know, I was listening to a podcast a couple of weeks ago where they were talking about like the romance movies from like the early 2000s and just the nonsense that those movies were like, right? And like, why are you taking up space in my head? And like, you know, whoever's there, and just making sure that the voice in my head is mine. And so the person who's showing up each day is being guided by me.
Right.
And so, right, so I'm directing the sails.
Mhm.
And so I can't control the wind. And so maybe I'm not looking for the leaps and bounds kind of transformation. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm looking to choose a new career direction or move across the country, or maybe I'm simply looking to show up as myself each day. Because if you're not showing up as yourself each day, then showing up as yourself each day is a huge transformation.
Right.
You know, and you could literally change nothing on the outside in your life. From the outside, everything will eventually change, by the way, if that happens. But like, you could literally change nothing in your life from the outside. But if you start showing up as yourself, because you actually start listening to yourself, it won't look any different to anybody else, at least at first. But that's a
You know,
big transformation.
It's interesting, Tova, because one of the things you just said just reminded me that I think one of the most important things we need to do is make sure we're listening to the current version of ourselves. Because how often do we fall into old patterns and rely on the messages that we've always told ourselves, and even though they don't ring true anymore, they're comfortable, or we've just been telling them to ourselves for so long that and sometimes we don't stop to question, is that still the case, or am I just listening to the comfortable old version of myself that I know really well and that will choose won't choose the red lipstick, let's put it that way, because it's frightening.
You know, I'll be honest, when I listen to that old version of myself, I have found, and this is speaking for myself, of course, that it's usually not me talking.
Right.
When I have gone back and I have listened to that version of me, it's not actually me.
Right.
It's, I have had glimpses of me, and we actually talk about that in so the next two podcast episodes are Riley and I interviewing each other about transformation and faith. So we decided to put each other in the hot seat, like we did our guests, since we were, you know, mean to them and ask them all of these hyper personal questions. We decided to do it to each other. We weren't mean. We were just, you know, asking.
I was gonna say, we weren't mean.
We weren't mean. We just asked very incredibly personal questions and didn't let them go until they answered them. And so we decided to do it to each other. But I talked about those moments where I didn't know I was trying to find my inner voice. I didn't know that's what I was looking for. I didn't know that was a thing. But despite my best efforts to ignore it, like I found it every once in a while. And it was like this moment of like, oh, this is what it's supposed to feel like. This is what being alive is supposed to feel like. And then
you know it.
Yeah. And then you know it, right? And then you spend, you know, years chasing it, but you didn't know what it was. So you didn't know what you were chasing.
Yeah, I would Audrey put something in the chat and I want to mention that, but first I would just like to note that if you are hearing in your inner voice work, and we have a course, it's free, to help you with your inner voice. So we can put in the chat, and when we send out the recording for anyone who's listening to the recording, we'll put a link to it. But it's like a 7-day email course on working on your inner voice. But if you are in that process of sort of reinvestigating your inner voice and you're hearing your childlike voice or your teenage voice a lot, that's generally a good indication that you have some inner child healing work to do. And I know as sort of type A professionals that I know a lot of us are, that feels a little weird and uncomfortable sometimes. But if we have that voice coming back up and it's a hurt and sad and angry voice, there might be some healing there that needs to be done, and some things that need to be investigated. And we will do our forever plug for therapy here. We always encourage people to go to therapy. We think it's the best thing ever. Obviously we've both been to therapy and we believe in it. But Audrey said I was just starting to think about why and how we hold on to nostalgia so much and not showing up in the present, which is also what triggered me to think about this sort of inner child work. And I've had to do lots of that. And that's, it's definitely, I think, Audrey, one of the reasons I think we do hold on to nostalgia is because a lot of us have childhood trauma, and it might not even be big trauma. Like anytime somebody says the word trauma, we think it has to be something huge and life altering, and like, something you'd see on, I don't know, Law and Order SUV, or like something really atrocious, right? But sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's smaller and we downgrade it and think, oh, that can't possibly be trauma because other people have had it so much worse. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't traumatic, and it doesn't mean it didn't create this nagging, mean voice in your head. So investigating those experiences and dealing with that in a safe and therapeutic environment, it is important and is necessary in order to have a true reckoning with your own inner voice and being able to understand and know who you are at your core.
Yeah, I think that is great to bring up, because I think even more than ever, I guess I can't really like define why, or necessarily, I can't blame the pandemic, let's say, on more awareness of like mental health and all that stuff. But I am just more aware of generational trauma and how like maybe we could say as our parents, or even beyond our parents, of that generational trauma that has continued to be passed down. And when we can become aware of it, to try to break some of those, let's say, traumatic cycle pieces that maybe hurt us as children or even today, and try to do better for our family, our friends, and our kids. And it's like not easy to do that. Like that is a super challenge. But it just makes me, just the conversation where it was going, it was like, yeah, there's generational trauma to break, and it's about identifying it and listening to our voice, and being assertive enough with ourselves and with our lives to transform for the best.
Yeah, because that itself, breaking that generational trauma, is transformation. It's hugely beneficial to everyone. Ourselves, our children, our relationships with other people. It's probably some of the hardest work a lot of us have to do.
Well, and I think a lot of us, I'm not, I know, Audrey, your kids are younger And so they probably hit that age right at the same time as the pandemic, where you're starting to be like, oh, okay, so you're kind of aware of things all at the same time, right? So it's like the mental health awareness the pandemic brought for all of us.
Mhm.
And now you're like, oh, and now I can see things in kids that maybe I didn't see before. Like I feel like as a mother, you start seeing things in your kids and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And there's also this, on one hand, we think of children as being so resilient. And of course, children are so resilient. And yet all of these adults are in therapy. And it's like, if we're so resilient, why are we all in therapy? And I think, sometimes people go to therapy and they go to therapy for a very specific finite amount of time, and they sort of can identify, they know why they're there, right? And they find that, and they can find what they need to heal, and they heal it. And then other people are more like me, where it's like this long and windy road. And it's like every week it's like a new Easter egg. You're like, oh.
No,
Riley
I
laughs.
think
This is
like
true.
for me, therapy is where I get to spend time with my voice. What does Audrey actually think? Because nobody's going to ask me that on a regular basis in my regular life. They're not. And in many ways, we're all a little selfish because we're all kind of looking out for ourselves in our relationships with other people. Like, what do I get out of this a little bit? Nothing is fully altruistic, but like that isn't always the healthiest thing. Like you have to listen to yourself when we are with other people as well, and identifying what my time is. So I think I think if for me, I can't listen to it unless I have somebody else kind of prompting me, because maybe that's a season in my life for now, but I don't really see it ending at this point. Because it's like, no, I need this time to like work my own thoughts out. And great for other people is that if they don't need to, or if they have enough support. But when we find like for me, when I'm just supporting myself in my own head and my own journey, like I need more of that time. One-on-one time.
That's good. That's what it's meant to be, right? It's meant to be a safe place where you can explore your inner workings and not feel judged or rushed or hurried. And so, there's no reason to feel like you ever have to stop doing that. I think it's wonderful, and my own journey with therapy was about gaining, I was in therapy for a long time. I'm not now, but only because I haven't found a good one where I am. But my journey was about gaining tools to learn how to change the way I process things, so that I had a healthier life, and getting through a bunch of other stuff first and then getting tools. So it's a long process for a lot of us, and unpacking things is just part of that, unfortunately. Fortunately, unfortunately, I don't know, it goes both ways. But gaining those tools and those life skills that maybe we didn't get as kids, or we didn't understand fully, or we just need extra help with, is there's nothing wrong with that. It's a wonderful thing to gift yourself. And what did we do last time? Was it self-care last time or the time before? I don't remember when we did.
Self-care was last time, and we included therapy on it. And
I think it's at the top of the list, personally.
Yeah. And also making sure that we figure out ways, and this is why we will send out the free inner voice course. I don't know why that's so hard to say. to figure out other ways that you can listen to your inner voice throughout the week, other than just therapy. Or if people are listening to this and they either aren't going to therapy because it's not for them, or they can't fit it into their schedule. And in the course, we give like journal prompts or recommended meditations, and there are a variety of meditations. So if meditation, if you're like, I've never done it before and I hate it, which if you've never done it before, you shouldn't hate it, right? But I've done it before and I hate it. And there's different prompts so that you can try different things. So you can try to build in something that works for you to check into your inner voice every day.
Yeah.
So whether it is writing in a journal once a day, and obviously that doesn't work for everybody.
And just to be clear, because I feel like we say this all the time, Tova, and I worry that people hear that and then they're like, I don't have time to write a book, ladies. When we say writing in your journal, it could be 2 sentences. It does not have to be, or it could be bullet points. It could be doodles. It could be, like
it could be a list of whatever. Yeah.
Maybe not your shopping list, but like, I mean, it could be if you're my journal.
Your shopping list. No, it could be, it could totally be 2 sentences. I think even, and what we encourage, like if you get overwhelmed, we are big fans of setting timers for things.
Mm-hmm.
So like, if you're like, I can't sit and write my journal, I don't have 20 minutes. Cool. Set a timer for 3. It will literally not take more than 3 minutes because you've set a timer for 3 minutes.
And that's
But I think all of the meditations we recommend are like less than 5.
Kept them all under 10 minutes.
Yeah, definitely under 10.
More than 10 minutes.
Or maybe you like walks, like set a 5-minute timer to get out for a walk, like literally a 5-minute walk. If you're not doing a walk now you're doing 5 minutes more. But the whole point is to do it by yourself, right? So you're checking in with yourself. If I'm a big fan of sitting in my car after my kids have gone inside the house and staying there and being like, yes, here are the keys. And then just staying there until somebody comes out to get me, usually crying. So it's a risk I take, I recognize. But I will sit in my car and just like deep breathe for a minute.
You can do the opposite too. You can just lock them in the car and not get in.
Yes, both of those things
regularly.
Yeah. Both of Audrey, you're making faces that show that clearly your kids are too young. Once they're a few years older, you'll be like, yes, you lock them in the car. You open the windows, you stand right next to it. I mean,
my kids are old enough to drive, so that would
go. So we don't have CPS calling us.
No, you're standing right next to it. You just put them in the car, and then you like stand next to it, and you're just like, but they're in there, and you're not.
Yeah. But that's what the washroom's for me. Yeah. I'm gonna lock myself in here for a little while.
And you take a minute of, but like I've noticed like sometimes those transition moments, you can like get a minute away from them, or I can build in those minutes. I also will say that on the days where like I drop the kids off at school, and this is something that nearly broke me until I figured out what I was missing, was when the pandemic started, I relied very heavily, I did not know this, on I would drop the kids off from school. I had already worked from home. So I already had this in my day. I would drop them off at school. I'd come home and I would like put on my tea, and I would either listen to music or a podcast or a book or whatever, but I would like clean up dishes and get the dishes running. And if my bed wasn't made, I'd make my bed. And I had this little routine, and it was my mental transition from like home to work. And I would wipe down the counters. I would light a candle. It was at most 15 minutes. And obviously I was doing stuff, but it was incredibly important to me. And mentally, it was when I really spent some time with myself. I did not know how important it was until the pandemic, when my children were there. And it took about 3 weeks of complete, and I mean, I was melting down with the rest of the entire world, but only when I finally realized what was happening, like what I needed. And then I figured out a way to sort of put it back into my day, kind of. But it wasn't until my youngest, they opened up the daycares and I started dropping him off and like really getting that routine back. But whatever it is, if you can find something in your day and to add moments to listen to yourself, even if, Audrey, like the big moment is that once a week therapy appointment. If you twice a week, that sounds awesome. That's awesome. Twice a week therapy appointment. But if you can find extra moments, that gives you that chance to start, and that helps you, you know, direct the sales,
Yep.
right? And make those where you're starting to guide that gradual transformation, because even though we feel like these transformations might be sudden, they're not. And so it is very empowering to remember that.
Yeah. It's funny
Um,
because I'm going through that exact thing with returning to the office right now. So after 2 years of having a routine, now I'm trying to figure out what that moment looks like. How do I carve that little bit of time out and still get out the door on time? And like, obviously I'm capable of this. I did it for
Right.
15 years beforehand.
right.
But now it just seems lost to me, and I've been putting it off because it's so stressful. And like I said, I have older children. My eldest is in college. My youngest is graduating high school this year. It's not like I've got to like usher small children out the door in the morning, although sometimes with the younger one, it feels like it still. But it just, I cannot wrap my head around how to make this transition work in a way that doesn't feel ridiculously stressful. So I think, and Tova, you actually reminded me of when my kids were small and my husband and I switched who was picking the kids up from daycare and who was dropping them off. And it was the same sort of thing. I had this routine, and the period of time between when we left the house, or sorry, when I dropped them off and when I arrived at work was my time. That's when I
Yeah.
took stock, I evaluated, I thought about my day, I made plans. Like it was 10 minutes and I was walking. And then that went away, and I was like my tool kit was gone. It was like, who am I? Where am I? Where are my children? What's my name? Like it was gone. So it's amazing, like just that ability to find that time and really, and I think you're right, it's really about listening to that voice, having a conversation with yourself and giving yourself that space and permission to basically indulge yourself in what you need for that time is huge. And when you don't have it, that's when I feel like we all start to feel like we've lost the reins a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and Audrey, you said something about being, you know, selfish because you're always thinking about yourself in your relationship, but like, or in relationships, but like you are your most important person in your life. You have to be your most important person in your life. And I know as I say that, you know, the part of me wants to scream and be like, no, it's my 3 kids. But I have to be my most important person in my life. I should be having a conversation with myself every single day. Like I miss when I don't talk to my kids every day. I should miss when I don't talk to myself every day.
It's a really good point.
Right. You should love yourself as much as you love your children. I mean, and in the same ferocity in which you love your children. And I also have the same issue that Tova has. I say that and I'm like, oh, I don't know how to do that. But I do. I mean, and we all do. It's just we, again, have been conditioned not to, right? We have been told, and we talked about this, I forget when, Tova, on one of our episodes, but we talked about, you know, this whole concept that's been running around Instagram about filling up your cup so you can pour it out again. It's like, no, I deserve a full cup because I'm a human being deserving of a full cup, not so I can.
I'm drinking that cup, damn it.
Yeah, I want my cup full. I get a full cup. We talked about it in the self-care workshop, and we talked about it in the episode that just came out this week with Chloe Stevens, who is amazing.
That's right.
Totally listen to it. She's like spectacular.
But you know, if we want our kids, the people we care about, the people who look up to us, the people who looked up to us without us realizing they're looking up to us, the people we are role models to, if we want them to grow into the kinds of people we want them to grow into, then we have to be willing to show them the kinds of people we want them to be. And that means we have to be willing to put ourselves first. And that is so uncomfortable only because we have been told it's wrong. It is not wrong. Somebody tricked us along the way into thinking it's wrong to put yourself first. Is it wrong if there's somebody like bleeding out in front of you? Well, maybe, but is it wrong like in the normal course of business? No. You know, you deserve to be happy, and you don't have to do anything to deserve that. You just exist, and therefore you deserve it. And so that's a whole other workshop.
I was going to
and
say
I'm
that's
getting
like
off track.
that's another great topic to talk about. But yeah, it is about that kind of like, I think that generation and all that stuff to of just kind of like being told, whether from your family or from people or society, because it's been glorified forever and ever. And you know, and something that I recognize is like, what is my level of excellence? What is my level? Like, what does it take like for me to feel good about like the work that I'm doing? And I've had to recognize that. And that might be different than yours. You know, it might be at a different standard or a different level than other people's. And like, I have to be accepting of that, of other people, but also like know where I am, like at what point am I good with myself. And a friend coming in, so
Yeah. I like that. I just wrote that down. What is my level of excellence? I think that's a great way to put it. I know we've kept you guys on for a lot longer than we intended, so Tove, we should probably wrap up.
Yes,
here, so
yes, I wanted to do a quick well, shout out to you, frankly. I wanted to share my screen quickly. We put together for everyone some affirmations. We're gonna send these out. We have them as a big sheet if you want to just like print out a sheet, but then we also have them as, I actually print out like little affirmations, and I don't know if you can tell what I'm doing, and kind of cut them out and like put them on mirrors and put them on my refrigerator. And so my kids can see them too. And I can kind of read them to myself when I just need to read something. By the way, I put them on my fridge because I open up my fridge to enjoy yummy food, not to like discourage myself from opening up the fridge, just to clarify. I just want to put that out there. It's just, I open the fridge to get food out of it. So it's like something I see. But we put up some great transformation affirmations that we put together. So here are some. We will attach these in when we send out the recording, and we'll send that out to everybody. But you can see some examples. We love affirmations. I will say that I have tried a variety of ways to incorporate affirmations into my life, and sticking them up around my house is definitely the best way and most successful way that I have figured out how to like share them around the world or around my house and get myself to use them. We also just wanted to remind everyone where you can find us. We are all over the place. So we're on Instagram, we're obviously on Facebook, we're on Pinterest, we have a website, and we have a podcast. And this whole season that's wrapping up in a couple of weeks is all about transformation. We dig into some of these topics and the research behind them, some of the stuff that we've talked about. We do dig deeper into some of this on the episodes. We kind of do every other episode. One is an interview and one is topic specific. And so definitely check it out. We have some really amazing guests who come and bare their soul with us and share their experiences of transformation and faith, because there are a lot of leaps of faith that have to take place. As Audrey alluded to, there's a lot of fear that goes with being willing to just listen to yourself and be yourself when you are transforming. And then last but not least, we put together in the fall a course, and you can find it on our website. But, one thing we talked a lot about, the two of us, was this concept of a mission statement. Because while we encourage you to listen to your inner voice all day long, sometimes it gets tiresome to have to, every time you have to make a decision, like do a deep dive into your inner voice and be like, okay, what would I do? How do we make this decision? And so we thought about how, like, a nonprofit I'm part of, or a company in our company, right? Like, we have a mission statement. So when we're making a decision, we reference our mission statement, right? And so the course is called Defining You, and it actually walks you through the process of creating your own personal mission statement. So when you're making a decision, you can just reference your own mission statement. So if you want to check it out, Riley put the link in the chat. And for those of you who can't see the chat because you're watching the recording, you can check it out. We'll put it in the email that we sent out with this. We did go over. We have been super good. I love the encouragement in the chat that Audrey, that your son is sending us.
This has been great.
We've been super good about sticking to about half an hour, but obviously this is a big topic, and so we went longer. So thanks for joining us and staying with us.
Thank you guys so much. It was so fun.
Thanks for sharing this with us. It's been great.
Have a good night, everybody.
Take
Take
care.
care, guys.